The sky above Velith Prime burned orange and red as the Dominion slavers descended upon the small colony with ruthless precision, their dark ships cutting through the clouds like predators diving toward helpless prey. And the peaceful agrarian moon that had never known war suddenly learned the taste of fire, and terror. 7-year-old Lyris von Sera pressed her small body deeper into the hollow beneath the roots of the great silver tree, her violet eyes wide with a fear she could not name, and her pale blue skin trembled as explosions rocked the ground around her hiding place, sending dirt and ash raining down upon her head. She had been playing in the fields when the first ships appeared, chasing butterflies with wings like liquid crystal, and her mother had screamed her name across the distance before a beam of light struck their home and turned everything. Lyris knew into smoke and memory. The Cathari were a peaceful species, farmers and artists who had chosen this quiet moon precisely because it lay far from the wars and conflicts that plagued the galaxy, and they had no weapons, no soldiers, no defense against the horror that now walked among their burning homes. Lyris could hear the screams of her people as the Dominion soldiers dragged them from their hiding places, and she understood with a child's terrible clarity that she was alone, that no one was coming to save her, that the monsters in black armor would find her eventually. The Dominion were slavers of the worst kind, a syndicate that harvested entire populations from unprotected worlds and sold them to the highest bidder across a dozen star systems. And they had come to Velith Prime because they knew no one would stop them. No one would care about a small colony of farmers on a forgotten moon, through the gaps in the roots. Lyris watched a Dominion soldier kick down the door of the schoolhouse where she had learned to read just 3 days ago, and she bit her hand to keep from crying out as children she knew were pulled into the harsh light and shoved toward the massive transport ships. Her heart pounded so hard she thought surely the soldiers would hear them, and she made herself as small as possible, pressing her face against the cool earth and praying to gods she barely understood. Far above the burning moon, in the cold silence of space, a Terran military patrol vessel received the distress signal that the Cathari had managed to send before their communication tower fell. And on the bridge of that vessel, a young sergeant named Marcus Cole listened to the desperate voices crying for help. The patrol was operating in neutral space, part of a peacekeeping task force that had strict orders to observe and report, but never to engage. And the captain of the vessel made it clear that they would document the attack and file a report with Galactic Union authorities who would do nothing because they always did nothing. Marcus Cole stood at his station and felt something twist inside his chest, something that had driven him to join the military in the first place. And he looked at his fire team of 8 soldiers who met his gaze with the same burning frustration he felt. "We have orders," the captain said without looking up from his console, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "Those are children down there," Marcus replied, and his voice carried a weight that made several officers turn to look at him. "Sergeant Cole, stand down." But Marcus was already walking toward the shuttle bay, and his fire team fell into step behind him without a word, because they knew what he knew, that some orders deserved to be broken, that some moments defined what a person truly was. They launched in a combat shuttle against direct commands, knowing that their careers were over, knowing that they would face court-martial if they survived. And none of them hesitated for even a single second. The Dominion soldiers on Velith Prime were experienced raiders who had conquered dozens of defenseless colonies, but they had never faced humans in combat, and they did not understand what was coming for them. Marcus and his team hit the ground running, their black armor scarred from previous battles, their weapons hot and ready, and they moved through the burning village with a speed and ferocity that the slavers could not comprehend. The first Dominion squad died before they even realized they were under attack, and the second squad managed to raise their weapons only to find themselves cut down by precise fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Humans were new to the galactic stage, a young species that most of the older civilizations dismissed as primitive and unimportant. But those civilizations had never seen humans fight for something they believed in, had never witnessed the terrible fury that these strange beings could unleash. When innocents suffered, Marcus moved through smoke and flame, his gray eyes scanning for survivors, for children who needed to be pulled from the wreckage. And his team spread out behind him in a formation they had practiced 1,000 times. Lyris heard the gunfire change, heard the Dominion soldiers shouting in confusion and fear, and she dared to lift her head just enough to peer through the roots at the chaos unfolding before her. She saw a figure in black armor fighting 5 Dominion soldiers at once, moving with a grace and violence she had never imagined possible. And she watched as one by one the slavers fell until only the armored stranger remained standing among the bodies. He turned toward her hiding place, and Lyris felt her breath catch in her throat as he walked closer, his weapon still raised, his posture alert for any threat. She should have been terrified, should have cowered deeper into the darkness. But something about the way he moved told her that this being was not like the others, that he had not come to hurt her. The stranger knelt beside the great silver tree and looked directly at the gap where Lyris hid, and for a moment neither of them moved, the burning world forgotten as their eyes met across the distance of species and language and everything that should have divided them. He removed his helmet, revealing a face unlike any she had seen before, with pale skin and gray eyes that held a calmness she desperately needed. And he spoke words in a language she did not understand, but his tone was soft and gentle despite the destruction around them. Lyris crawled forward without knowing why, drawn by something in his expression that promised safety. And when she emerged from beneath the roots, she was shaking so badly she could barely stand. The human soldier scooped her up in his arms as easily as her father once had, and she buried her face against his armored shoulder as he carried her through the burning village, past the bodies of slavers and the wreckage of her entire world. Explosions still rocked the ground around them, and she could hear the human shouting to his companions, coordinating their retreat toward a shuttle that waited at the edge of the colony. But through it all, his grip on her remained steady and sure. They reached the shuttle, and the human handed her to another soldier, who wrapped her in a thermal blanket and checked her for injuries. But before he left to go back into the flames, the human pressed something into her small hands. Lyris looked down at a worn metal coin with strange symbols she could not read, still warm from being pressed against his armor. And when she looked up to ask what it meant, he was already gone, running back toward the village to find more survivors. She never learned his name, and in the official records, the Terran intervention was listed as an unauthorized engagement that resulted in disciplinary action for all involved. But Lyris never forgot his face, never forgot his eyes, never forgot the way he had carried her through fire, as if she mattered more than anything in the universe. The humans saved over 400 Kithari children that day, and then they vanished back into the stars, leaving behind only ashes and memories in one small girl clutching a metal coin that would become the most precious thing she owned. 25 years later, Lyris still wore that coin around her neck, hidden beneath her robes, a reminder of the day she learned that the galaxy contained monsters, but also contained something else, something rarer and more precious, beings who would risk everything for strangers they would never see again. The Galactic Union Diplomatic Station, Helix 9, floated in the void between 3 star systems, a massive structure of gleaming metal and crystalline domes where the fate of worlds was decided by beings in formal robes who had never known hunger or fear. And Arbiter Lyris von Serra walked its polished corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through decades of hard work. She was no longer the trembling child who had hidden beneath the roots of a silver tree, but a respected judge who mediated disputes between species and governments. And her reputation for fairness had made her one of the most sought-after arbiters in the entire You knew her violet eyes had grown sharper with age, and her pale blue skin was marked with the traditional silver patterns of a Cathari scholar. But beneath her formal robes, she still wore the human coin on a delicate chain. A secret she had never shared with anyone a day was different from the hundreds of cases she had presided over before. Because today the hegemony of Cathara, her own people's government, had demanded the extradition and execution of a human military contractor accused of inciting violence on a contested border world. The political stakes were enormous, and everyone on Helix 9 understood that the wrong verdict could spark a war between Earth and the hegemony that would devastate entire systems. So the Union had assigned their most trusted arbiter to the case. Lyris reviewed the files as she walked toward the tribunal chamber, scanning the accusations against the human known as Commander Marcus Cole, a former Terran military officer who had been dishonorably discharged 15 years ago and now worked as a private security consultant. Hegemony claimed he had organized armed resistance on the planet Decent 4, resulting in the deaths of 17 hegemony peacekeepers and the destruction of valuable infrastructure. And they demanded justice in the form of his immediate execution. Earth's representatives countered that Cole had acted in defense of refugees who were being forcibly relocated by hegemony forces. And they insisted that any trial must follow proper Union procedures rather than hegemony. Lyris had handled such disputes many times before, balancing the demands of powerful governments against the principles of interstellar law. But something about this case made her uneasy in a way she could not explain. She entered the tribunal chamber through the judge's entrance, a small door behind the elevated bench where she would sit in judgment, and she took a moment to arrange her robes and collect her thoughts. Before the main doors opened, the chamber filled with representatives from both sides, hegemony officials in their ornate ceremonial armor and Earth diplomats in their simple dark suits. And the tension between them was so thick that Lyris could almost taste it in the recycled air. Then the prisoner was brought in, and Lyris felt her heart stop in her chest. He was older now, with gray at his temples and deep lines carved into his face by years of hard living. And his left arm had been replaced by a cybernetic prosthetic that gleamed dull silver in the chamber's lights. But his eyes were the same pale gray, impossibly calm, exactly as she remembered them from the worst and best day of her childhood. She knew him instantly. And for a moment, the grand tribunal chamber dissolved around her, and she was 7 years old again, clutching a warm metal coin as a stranger carried her through fire. The human showed no sign of recognition as he was led to the defendant's platform, his wrists bound by energy shackles that hummed with a soft blue light. And why would he recognize her after all these years when she had been just one child among hundreds he had saved? Lyris forced herself to breathe, to remember who she was now and what she had to do. Because she was an arbiter of the Galactic Union, and personal feelings had no place in this chamber. This tribunal is now in session, she said, and her voice did not tremble despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. We are gathered to determine whether Commander Marcus Cole shall be extradited to the hegemony of Kethra to face charges of incitement to violence and the murder of 17 peacekeeping officers. The hegemony prosecutor, a tall Cathari male with silver markings that indicated high noble birth, rose to present his opening statement, and his words painted Cole as a dangerous mercenary who had deliberately sabotaged peaceful relocation efforts and murdered innocent soldiers. Lyris listened with half her attention while the other half struggled to process the impossible coincidence that had brought this man before her. And she found herself studying every detail of his face, cataloging the ways he had changed and the ways he remained the same. The Earth representative offered a very different story, describing Cole as a humanitarian who had discovered that the relocation was actually a forced deportation that would have resulted in the deaths of thousands of refugees. and who had organized their defense when hegemony forces opened fire on unarmed civilians. The refugees included over 2,000 children, the Earth representative said. And Lyris saw something flicker in Cole's gray eyes. A quiet pain that he quickly suppressed. The first day of testimony stretched for hours, with witnesses from both sides offering contradictory accounts of what had happened on Thesan 4. And through it all, Cole sat in silence, his expression revealing nothing. When the session finally ended and the chamber began to empty, Lyris remained at her bench, watching as the guards prepared to escort Cole back to his holding cell. He looked up at her for just a moment, and their eyes met across the distance of the chamber. And Lyris felt that same strange connection she had felt 25 years ago beneath the roots of the silver tree. Did he know who she was? Or did he simply see another alien judge who would decide his fate based on political pressure rather than truth? She could not tell, and as he was led away, she realized that she faced an impossible situation. Because she was not an impartial arbiter. She was a woman whose entire life had been shaped by a moment of impossible kindness from the man she now held. Power over union law required her to recuse herself from any case where she had a personal connection to the parties involved. But how could she explain that connection without revealing the secret she had kept for a quarter of a century? And if she stepped aside, who would replace her? And would they care about justice or only about preventing a war by sacrificing one human to the hegemony's demands? Lyris returned to her private chambers and stood before the mirror, pulling the coin from beneath her robes and holding it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight as she had done countless times before. "What do I do?" she whispered to her reflection. But no answer came. The man who had saved her life was going to die unless she found a way to help him. But helping him could destroy everything she had built and undermine the very system of justice she had devoted her life to upholding. She spent the night reading through every document in the case file, searching for something that would help her understand what had really happened on Thesan 4. And what she found made her blood run cold. The evidence against Cole was full of inconsistencies and gaps, statements that contradicted each other, and witness testimonies that seemed almost scripted. And beneath the official narrative, Lyris began to see the outline of something much darker. Someone was lying, and the lies were too coordinated to be accidental, which meant that this trial was not about justice at all, but about something else entirely. Lyris closed the files and sat in the darkness of her chamber, the coin warm against her chest. And she made a decision that would either save an innocent man or destroy her career forever. She would find the truth, no matter what it cost her. Lyris spent 3 days digging through classified archives and secure databases, using her authority as an arbiter to access records that most beings would never be allowed to see. And what she discovered confirmed her worst fears about the trial she was presiding over. The peaceful relocation on Thesan 4 had never been peaceful at all. And the refugees Cole had defended were not random civilians, but survivors of Dominion raids who had escaped the same slavers that had attacked Velith Prime when she was a child. A hegemony had claimed the refugees were illegal settlers who needed to be moved to proper facilities. But the transport ships assigned to carry them were registered to shell companies that led back to the Dominion Syndicate through a dozen layers of false ownership. Cole had not incited violence. He had prevented a massacre. And the 17 hegemony peacekeepers who died were actually Dominion agents wearing stolen uniforms who had opened fire on unarmed families. Lyris sat in her chamber, surrounded by evidence that proved Cole's innocence. And she felt sick as she realized that certain officials in her own government were working with the very slavers who had destroyed her childhood home. 3 names appeared again and again in the financial records. 3 high-ranking hegemony officials who had grown impossibly wealthy over the past decade through investments that traced back to Dominion operations. And they were the same officials who had pushed hardest for Cole's immediate execution. They wanted him dead because he knew what they had done, because he had seen the truth on Thesan 4 and could expose their connection to the slave trade that continued to prey on vulnerable populations across the galaxy. But Lyris could not simply present this evidence in open tribunal, because doing so would reveal how she had obtained it and would give the conspirators time to destroy records and silence witnesses. Before any formal investigation could begin, she needed to be clever, needed to find a way to bring the truth to light without alerting her enemies to what she knew. And she realized that meant talking to Cole himself. Arranging a private meeting with a prisoner under her jurisdiction was highly irregular, but not impossible, and Lyris used a procedural loophole to schedule what she called a clarification interview in Cole's holding cell. The guards who escorted her gave her strange looks, but did not question an arbiter's authority. And soon she found herself standing before the energy barrier that separated her from the man who had shaped her entire existence. Cole looked up from the simple cot where he sat, his gray eyes assessing her with the same quiet intensity she remembered from her childhood. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Arbiter Von Sarah," he said finally, his voice rougher than she remembered, but still carrying that calm steadiness that had soothed her terror 25 years ago. "I was not expecting a personal visit." Lyris dismissed the guards with a gesture, waiting until they had retreated beyond earshot before she spoke. And when she did, she chose to speak in the old Veleth dialect, the language of her destroyed colony that few beings in the galaxy still remembered. "Why do humans fight for strangers?" she asked, watching his face carefully for any reaction. Cole went very still, and something shifted in his eyes as he looked at her with new attention, studying her features as if searching for something he had lost long ago, because no child should burn alone. He answered in the same dialect, his pronunciation imperfect but recognizable, and Lyris felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. He remembered the words, the philosophy that had driven him to disobey orders and save 400 children on a burning moon. But did he remember her specifically? "You were on Veleth Prime," she said. "And it was not a question. I was on many worlds," he replied carefully. "I saved many children, or tried to, but I cannot claim to remember every face." Lyris reached beneath her robes and pulled out the coin, holding it up so he could see it through the energy barrier. And she watched his expression transform from guarded caution to something much more vulnerable. "You gave this to me," she said. "I was 7 years old, hiding beneath the roots of a silver tree while my world burned. And you found me, and you carried me to safety. And you put this in my hands before you went back into the fire." Cole rose from the cot and walked to the barrier, his eyes fixed on the small metal disc that had traveled so far from where he had left it. "My grandfather's coin," he said softly. "I thought I lost it on that mission, and I was sad because it was the only thing I had left of him. But now I understand that I did not lose it at all. I gave it to someone who needed it more than I did. I have worn it every day since that night," Lyris told him. "It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there are beings who will fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And it inspired me to become what I am today." Cole studied her face with new understanding, and she could see him connecting the trembling child he had saved to the powerful arbiter who now held his life in her hands. "You grew up well," he said simply. And somehow those 3 words meant more to her than all the praise and honors she had received in her entire career. "You are innocent," she said, lowering her voice even further. "I have seen the evidence. I know what really happened on Thesan 4, and I know why the hegemony wants you dead." Cole nodded slowly, unsurprised by her revelation, and she realized that he had known all along that the trial was a farce. "Then you also know that exposing the truth will start a war," he said. "The hegemony will not allow their corruption to be revealed, and they will burn worlds to keep their secrets safe. So I have made my peace with dying if it means preventing that destruction. You would let them kill you to protect people you have never met? Is that not what I have always done? Cole asked, and there was no pride in his voice. Only a quiet acceptance of who he was and what he believed. Lyris felt anger rise in her chest. Anger at the conspirators who had twisted justice into a weapon. Anger at the galaxy that allowed such corruption to flourish. And anger at this stubborn human who was willing to sacrifice himself for strangers who would never know his name. No, she said firmly. I will not allow it. I did not spend 25 years carrying your coin to watch you die for their lies. Arbiter, I appreciate your sentiment, but there is nothing you can do that will not make things worse. You saved my life when I was a child who meant nothing to you. Lyris said, do you think I will not fight just as hard to save yours? Cole was silent for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with decades of instinct that told him to protect others by sacrificing himself. What do you intend to do? He finally asked. I intend to show the galaxy what humans already know, she replied. That some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. And that truth is more powerful than any conspiracy. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. The coin, he said. Keep it. It has found its proper owner. And I think my grandfather would be proud to know where it ended up. Lyris touched the metal disc against her chest and nodded, then walked out of the holding cell with a plan forming in her mind. A plan that would either expose the corruption at the heart of her government or destroy everything she had worked to build. She had 3 days before the tribunal reconvened. 3 days to gather allies and prepare her gambit. And she would not waste a single moment. The man who had saved her from fire deserved nothing less than everything she had to give. The tribunal chamber was filled to capacity when Lyris took her seat on the elevated bench, with representatives from a dozen species crowding the observation galleries to witness what everyone expected to be the final day of a trial that had captured the attention of the entire galaxy. The hegemony prosecutor looked confident, almost smug, certain that the political pressure would force the arbiter to deliver the verdict his masters desired. And the 3 conspirators sat in the front row of the hegemony delegation, their faces masks of dignified concern that hid the corruption beneath. Cole stood on the defendant's platform with the same quiet calm he had maintained throughout the proceedings. A man who had accepted his fate and found peace with it. And Lyris felt a surge of determination as she looked at him. She had spent the past 3 days reaching out to contacts across the galaxy, calling in favors she had accumulated over decades of fair judgments. And now she was ready to spring a trap that would either save an innocent man or destroy her career forever. Before we proceed to closing arguments, Lyris announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I am invoking the protocol of character evidence under the old conventions, a provision that allows testimony regarding the accused's lifetime conduct to be entered into the record. The hegemony prosecutor rose immediately, his face showing the first signs of concern. Arbiter, this protocol has not been used in over 200 years. Surely it is not applicable to a straightforward criminal matter. The accused faces execution, Lyris replied calmly. The old conventions are clear that in capital cases, evidence of character is always relevant. And I have decided that such evidence will help this tribunal render a just verdict. She gestured to the chamber doors, and they swung open to reveal a line of beings waiting to testify. Representatives of species from across the galaxy, who had traveled to Helix 9 at her request. The first witness was a Dreth merchant, a massive reptilian being whose cargo ship had been attacked by pirates in neutral space 5 years ago, and who told the tribunal how Marcus Cole had responded to his distress signal and fought off the attackers without asking for payment or reward. He saved my crew, my cargo, and my life, the Dreth said. his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. And when I tried to give him money, he refused. He said that helping people was not a business. It was a duty. The second witness was a Yulani scientist, a delicate being with iridescent scales who had been trapped on a research station when its reactor began to fail, and who described how Cole had navigated a ship through a debris field to extract her and her colleagues before the station exploded. Any other pilot would have waited for the reactor to stabilize. The scientist said, but Commander Cole said that waiting was not an option when lives were at stake, and he flew through conditions that should have killed us all to bring us home. The third witness was a Pelori veteran, a four-armed warrior from a species known for their fierce pride, who had served beside Cole in a peacekeeping mission a decade ago, and who spoke with respect that bordered on reverence. I have fought beside many beings from many worlds, the veteran said, and I have never met anyone like this human. He does not know how to abandon people. It is simply not in his nature. And I would follow him into any battle without hesitation. Witness after witness came forward, telling stories that spanned years and species and star systems, painting a picture of a man who had devoted his entire life to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The hegemony prosecutor grew increasingly agitated as the testimony continued, objecting repeatedly and demanding that Lyris end this circus and proceed to the verdict. But she overruled him each time with calm authority. The tribunal will hear all relevant evidence, she said. Justice requires nothing less. Finally, when the last witness had spoken and the chamber had fallen silent, the hegemony prosecutor rose to make his final objection, Arbiter von Serra. I must formally demand your recusal from this case, he said, his voice sharp with barely contained anger. Your conduct throughout these proceedings has demonstrated clear bias in favor of the defendant, and the hegemony cannot accept a verdict rendered by a judge who has abandoned all pretense of impartiality. The chamber erupted in murmurs, and Lyris let them continue for a moment before raising her hand for silence. You accuse me of bias, she said, and her voice was steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Very well. Let me show you exactly what my bias is. She reached beneath her robes and pulled out the coin, the small metal disc that had traveled across 25 years and countless light years to arrive at this moment. And she placed it on the tribunal bench for all to see 25 years ago. She said, a colony on the moon of Velith Prime was attacked by Dominion slavers. Over 2,000 Kethari were killed or taken, and those of us who survived did so only because a group of Terran soldiers disobeyed their orders and came to save us. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder, and Lyris saw the three conspirators exchange worried glances. I was 7 years old, she continued. I was hiding beneath the roots of a tree, watching my world burn, when a human soldier found me. He carried me through fire and death to safety, and before he left, he gave me this coin. She picked up the disc and held it so the entire chamber could see the worn symbols on its surface. That soldier was Marcus Cole, the man you want to execute for the crime of defending children. The same crime he committed when he saved me. And I have worn this coin every day since that night, as a reminder of what one person can do when they choose to fight for what is right. The chamber had gone completely silent, and Lyris could feel the weight of every eye upon her. You say I am biased, she said, looking directly at the hegemony prosecutor. And you are correct. I am biased toward the truth. I am biased toward justice. And I am biased toward the man who taught me that strangers are worth dying for. She touched the control on her bench, and holographic displays flickered to life throughout the chamber, showing the evidence she had gathered over the past 3 days. These are the financial records linking 3 members of the hegemony delegation to the Dominion Syndicate, she said, as names and numbers scrolled across the displays. These are the transport manifests, showing that the ships sent to Thesan 4 were owned by Dominion front companies. And these are the classified communications, proving that the peacekeepers who died were actually Dominion agents sent to capture refugees and sell them into slavery. The chamber erupted into chaos as representatives shouted questions and accusations. And Lyris saw the three conspirators trying to push their way toward the exits, only to find Union peacekeepers blocking their path. I have transmitted this evidence to the Galactic Union Security Council, Lyris announced over the noise, and I have requested an immediate investigation into corruption within the hegemony government. Commander Cole will remain in Union custody until that investigation is complete, but he will not be extradited. And he will not be executed. The hegemony prosecutor lunged toward her bench, his face twisted with rage. But Union guards intercepted him before he could reach her. Cole stood on the defendant's platform, his gray eyes meeting hers across the chaos of the chamber. And she saw something in his expression that might have been pride or gratitude, or simply the recognition of one fighter acknowledging another. She had risked everything: her career, her reputation, her place in the society she had worked so hard to build. And she had done it for the same reason he had: disobeyed orders 25 years ago because some things were worth fighting for, because no child should burn alone, because humans had taught her that strangers could become family if you were brave enough to reach out your hand. The peacekeepers moved through the chamber restoring order, and Lyris watched as the three conspirators were taken into custody, their faces showing the dawning horror of beings who had believed themselves untouchable. The trial was over, but the real work was just beginning. And Lyris knew that the next few weeks would determine whether her gambit had saved more than just one man's life. She looked at Cole one more time, and he gave her a small nod, a simple acknowledgement of everything they had shared and everything they had become. The child he had saved had grown up to save him in return, and somehow that felt exactly right. 1 week had passed since the tribunal chamber had erupted into chaos. And in that time, the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. With the evidence Lyris had gathered spreading through news networks and diplomatic channels like fire through dry grass, the three conspirators had been formally charged with treason, conspiracy, and aiding the Dominion Syndicate. And their arrest had triggered investigations across half a dozen systems that uncovered a web of corruption reaching far deeper than anyone had imagined. Dominion slave operations that had operated with impunity for decades were suddenly being raided by Union forces armed with intelligence that traced back to the files Lyris had compiled. And thousands of captives were being freed from holding facilities that had hidden in plain sight. The hegemony government had issued a formal apology for the Veloth Prime massacre, acknowledging for the first time that the unauthorized Terran intervention had actually saved over 400 Keth-Ari children from the slavers, and that the soldiers who had disobeyed orders to save those children deserved recognition rather than punishment. Marcus Cole had been exonerated of all charges and released from custody, his record cleared, and his actions on Thizon 4 officially classified as legitimate humanitarian defense. And the families of the refugees he had saved had sent messages of gratitude from across the galaxy. Lyris had been offered a seat on the Union High Council, the highest honor a non-human could receive in interstellar politics. And she had declined without hesitation because she knew her work was not finished and could not be done from behind a desk. She found Cole on the observation deck of Helix 9, standing alone before the vast windows that looked out on the distant stars, his cybernetic arm gleaming in the soft light as ships departed for worlds she would never see. "You did not have to do what you did," he said without turning around, somehow knowing it was her who approached. "You risked everything for a man you barely knew." Lyris moved to stand beside him, their reflections ghostly in the transparent metal of the windows. And she pulled the coin from beneath her robes one more time. "You gave this to me on Veloth," she said. Holding it out to him, I was 7 years old, and I did not understand why a stranger would risk his life for me, why anyone would run toward fire when they could run away. Cole turned to look at her, his gray eyes the same as she remembered them, calm and steady, and somehow holding all the weight of a lifetime spent fighting battles that no one asked him to fight. "My grandfather gave me that coin when I was a boy," he said. "He told me it was lucky, but I think he meant something else. I think he meant that luck is something you make by choosing to help people. When it would be easier to walk away, Lyris pressed the coin into his palm, but he closed her fingers back around it and gently pushed her hand away. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs with you now." And I think my grandfather would be proud to know where it ended up. She felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes. The same tears she had fought back as a terrified child in the arms of a stranger. And she did not try to stop them this time. "You saved my life," she said. "I never even knew your name until a week ago. I spent 25 years wondering who you were and whether you were still alive, and whether you ever thought about the children you saved." Cole was quiet for a long moment, watching the ships trace lines of light against the darkness. "I think about them often," he finally admitted. "Every child I carried out of fire, every family I reunited, every life I managed to save. They are the reason I keep going when everything else tells me to stop." "How do you do it?" Lyris asked. "How do you keep fighting for strangers when the galaxy is so vast and the suffering never ends?" Cole turned to face her fully, and she saw in his eyes the same question she had asked herself 1,000 times. "When I was young," he said, "I believed I could save everyone. And when I learned that was impossible, I almost gave up. But then I realized that the point was never to save everyone. The point was to save someone, anyone, to prove that it was possible. To show that one person choosing to do the right thing could make a difference." He looked back at the stars, at the infinite darkness that contained both monsters and miracles. "You were hiding under a tree on Velith Prime, and I could have walked past you. Could have told myself that one child was not worth the risk, but I did not. And 25 years later, that child grew up to be someone who changed the galaxy." Lyris felt the weight of his words settle into her chest, filling spaces that had been empty since the night her world burned. "I understand now," she said quietly, "why humans are so frightening to the predators of the galaxy. It is not your weapons or your strength. It is your stubborn refusal to accept that cruelty must go unanswered." Cole smiled, and for the first time she saw the weariness beneath his calm, the exhaustion of a man who had been fighting for so long that he had forgotten what peace felt like. "We are a strange species," he agreed. "We have done terrible things to each other and to others. But we have also done impossible things, beautiful things. And I choose to believe that the good outweighs the bad. What will you do now?" Lyris asked. "Your name has been cleared. Your record restored. You could retire somewhere peaceful and never fight again." Cole laughed, a soft sound that held no bitterness despite everything he had endured. "I thought about it," he admitted, "for about 5 minutes, and then I received a message from a colony in the outer reach. They are being threatened by raiders, and they have no one to help them. Just like Velith Prime all those years ago." Lyris felt something click into place inside her, a decision she had been avoiding suddenly becoming clear. "I declined the council seat," she said. "I told them my work was not finished." Cole looked at her with curiosity, waiting for her to continue. "I have spent my career sitting in judgment of others," she said, "using laws and procedures to seek justice from behind a bench. But you taught me that sometimes justice requires getting your hands dirty. Sometimes it requires running toward fire." She touched the coin against her chest, feeling its familiar warmth. "I want to do more than judge," she said. "I want to help, really help, the way you helped me." Cole studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing her words, assessing her resolve the way He had once assessed the distance between a burning village and a waiting shuttle. "It is not an easy life," he warned her. "There is no glory in it, no recognition, only the knowledge that you did what you could when it mattered." "I know," she said. "But I think that knowledge is enough." Cole nodded slowly, and something that might have been hope flickered in his gray eyes. "The colony in the outer reach," he said. "They need someone who can navigate bureaucracy, who knows the law, who can fight with words as well as weapons. I could use a partner like that." Lyris felt a smile spread across her face. The first genuine smile she had worn in weeks. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Cole said. "Early, so get some rest. The journey is long, and the work will be hard." He extended his hand, the human gesture of agreement she had learned in her years as an arbiter. And she grasped it firmly. "Partners," she said. "Partners." He agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly past the observation windows. Two beings from different worlds brought together by fire and kindness and the stubborn belief that strangers were worth fighting for. Lyris thought about the terrified child she had been and the woman she had become, about the long journey from beneath the roots of a silver tree to this moment on a station between the stars. And she understood finally that the coin she wore was not lucky at all. It was a reminder, a promise, a symbol of everything humans believed and everything they had taught her to believe. She would carry it with her into whatever darkness lay ahead. And when she found children hiding in the ashes of burning worlds, she would do exactly what Marcus Cole had done for her all those years ago. She would reach out her hand and show them that they were not alone. The universe was vast and full of fire, and humans never stopped running toward it, and now neither would she.